up as a kid. All a nigga wanna have was a Burberry scarf and $3 in my pocket. Instead I got beat with a switch, but I don't give a fuck, but it's on my body. Scars all up on me, but I run around from.
Last week, I went to get my hair cut. Now, in the barbershop that I go to, it's 3 barbers. It is a Chicago Bears fan, a Jacksonville Jaguar fan, and a Dallas Cowboy fan. Now, the barber that was the Dallas Cowboy fan was arguing with a Philadelphia Eagles fan that had walked in. And they were debating about who was the best quarterback in the division, Carson Wentz or Dak Prescott. And the Dallas Cowboy fan said that Dak Prescott's a better quarterback than Carson Wentz because he had better stats. And me and the Philadelphia Eagles fans were trying to say that, no, Carson Wentz is the better quarterback because Carson Wentz took the Philadelphia Eagles to the playoffs with a banged up group of wide receivers. They basically had guys off the street playing wide receiver. Their best wide receiver to end the season was Greg Ward Jr., who played in the now defunct Alliance of American Football League, AAA, aka the AAF. And tight end Zach Ertz, who is one of the best tight ends in the NFL. And that's pretty much it. Zach Ertz was Carson Wentz's best target. He also had off the line that wasn't as good as what it typically is due to also suffering injuries. So Carson Wentz took and basically carried a Philadelphia Eagles offense that was depleted with injuries and still got them to the playoffs. Meanwhile, Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys missed the playoffs and underachieved despite having one of the best offensive lines in football, throwing to Amari Cooper, Randall Cobb, and Michael Gallup. Now, I told the Dallas Cowboy fan, I said that how is Dak Prescott better than Carson Wentz when Carson Wentz carried the Eagles on his back to the playoffs with basically no wide receivers and his only reliable target being Zach Ertz? And his argument was Dak Prescott had better stats. Well, of course Dak Prescott is going to have better stats because he's throwing to better receivers. Dak Prescott last season threw for 4,902 passing yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions while completing 65.1% of his passes. Carson Wentz threw for 4,039 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, completed 63.9% of his passes. But think about that. Dak Prescott threw for 3 more touchdowns with Carson Wentz with a superior group of wide receivers than what Carson Wentz had to work with. He was throwing to Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and Randall Cobb, and also Jason Witten, who also was pretty productive as well last year despite being up there in age. And a lot of Cowboy fans say that, oh, JT, Dak Prescott was held back by coaching. So is Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson has been carrying the Houston Texans on his back and Bill O'Brien on his back ever since his second year in the NFL. So don't tell me nothing about Dak Prescott being held back by coaching because Deshaun Watson has been getting the Texans to the playoffs despite having Bill O'Brien as his head coach. So I don't want to hear anything about Dak Prescott being held back by coaching because it was several games that the Dallas Cowboys lost last year because of Dak Prescott underperforming in big moments. Let's talk about the game against the New York Jets that they lost. Let me tell you something. If you consider Dak Prescott a top 10 quarterback, it's no reason why he should be losing to quarterbacks like Sam Darnold and Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater was a backup quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. No offense to Teddy Bridgewater, but if you're a top 10 quarterback, you should be able to win those matchups. And he lost that game due to not coming up in big moments for the Dallas Cowboys. Another good example is when they lost to the New England Patriots. Dak Prescott had the ball in his hands to a chance to win the game for the Dallas Cowboys, and he missed a couple of big throws that drive. And as a franchise quarterback, when the ball is in your hands, you got to be able to seal the deal and win the game. Meanwhile, Carson Wentz made several big plays for the Philadelphia Eagles in the fourth quarter with the game on the line, despite not throwing to a great group of wide receivers, only having Zach Ertz as his only number one option and having a depleted group of basically offensive linemen that were blocking for him. Not to mention, he didn't have Ezekiel Elliott who rushed for 1,400 yards last season. So he didn't have that good of a ground game that Dak Prescott had. And despite all that, Carson Wentz was able to overcome not having as talented of a team that Dak Prescott had and still got the Eagles to the playoffs. Meanwhile, Dak Prescott missed the playoffs with the better supporting cast around him. Now, let me ask you something. Which one would you prefer? Would you prefer a quarterback who did more with less, or a quarterback who did less with more? Carson Wentz took the Eagles to the playoffs with nobody's playing wide receiver and Zach Ertz in a depleted group of offensive linemen. But Dak Prescott had a fairly healthy offensive line, Zeke in the backfield, and a talented group of wide receivers, and still couldn't get the Cowboys to the playoffs. And for those of you guys who say coaching, I'm going to say, look at Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson has been carrying the Houston Texans on his back ever since he got drafted there. Year 2, Bill O'Brien isn't a good coach. The defense, Houston hasn't had a good defense in years. So, I mean, you can blame the coaching all you want to, but there's several games that the Cowboys lost last year because of Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott didn't rise to the occasion. Meanwhile, Carson Wentz did. If Carson Wentz was on the Dallas Cowboys last season, the Dallas Cowboys probably would have had a 11-5 with 12-4 record and would have made the playoffs. But if Dak Prescott was on the Eagles, they wouldn't even have made the playoffs. I don't even think they would have had a winning record. Because Dak Prescott is only as good as the guys that he has around him. Carson Wentz is probably one of the few quarterbacks who is a top 10 quarterback who did more than any other quarterback who we consider a top 10 quarterback. Carson Wentz went to the playoffs with less talent than Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes was throwing to Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. Meanwhile, Carson Wentz did more with less. He won more games than he won games despite not having a great team around him. But Patrick Mahomes did. What about Russell Wilson? Russell Wilson made it to the playoffs. He was throwing to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Although his offensive line wasn't that great, he still had more talent around to work with than what Carson Wentz had to win with. What about Drew Brees? Drew Brees had more talent than Carson Wentz. But despite that, Carson Wentz still went to the playoffs. So it is quarterbacks that Carson Wentz went to the playoffs despite not having the same amount of talent as other guys like Drew Brees, Patrick Mahomes, and Russell Wilson. So once again, I'm asking you guys a question. Which one would you prefer? The quarterback who took his team to the playoffs with a not so great offensive line that was injured and a not so great group of wide receivers that were also injured, or a quarterback in Dak Prescott who had a better team around him but couldn't get the Cowboys to the playoffs? And I understand it's a team game, but in big moments, Carson Wentz stepped up, and in big moments, Dak Prescott, he shrunk. He came up small. He came up short. So, I'm taking Carson Wentz over Dak Prescott. I want the quarterback who does more with less. I want the quarterback who has proven that he can win without having a great group of talent around him. Meanwhile, Dak Prescott has proven that he cannot win without Ezekiel Elliott. He can't win without Amari Cooper. He can't win without a great coaching staff. He needs everything to go his way. An elite quarterback, a quarterback that you consider elite, is a quarterback that can make something out of nothing. He can turn a bad play call into a 5 or 3 yard gain. An elite quarterback elevates the guy who is calling the plays. Meanwhile, a quarterback who is considered elite, that's considered average to above average, is only as good as the talent that he has around him, and is only as good as the guys who is calling the plays. Now, give it, Dak Prescott's a little bit more athletic, even though Carson Wentz is pretty athletic as well. But at the end of the day, all around, Carson Wentz is a better quarterback. He did more with less. Carson Wentz was able to make it to the playoffs despite not having the talent that guys like Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Patrick Mahomes, and Russell Wilson had. So Carson Wentz, in my opinion, is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott.